Yes, as I'm sure you can imagine, the release of Patrick Stewart's memoir has been pretty bloody cool and a long time coming. So we're going to go through some of the biggest things to come out of this memoir and maybe some things we already knew before. Before I go on at all, I want to say, if you haven't picked up a copy of this, I really do recommend it, because obviously we're going to discuss it, and it's going to discuss it in terms of, well, I guess spoilers, for want of a better word, but it won't take away from the experience of reading the book yourself. So I do seriously recommend that you pick up a copy of this. Either this physical copy, you can get an ebook copy, or if you want to get the Audible version when it comes along. And I want to say a big thank you as well to my friend Sarah, who helped me pick up my copy for this video. Before I go any further, thank you so much to Clive Burrell, who was able to break down and put together this article for us. You can check that out over on whatculture.com. I'm Sean Ferry for TrekCulture, and here are 10 biggest takeaways from Patrick Stewart's memoir, and one that wasn't. Number 11. Wasn't he direct? Making It So covers virtually every aspect of Patrick Stewart's career, from his birth to on the poverty-stricken streets of the city he was born in, up until the writing of the book. But one thing that does seem to be overlooked is his time behind the camera on Star Trek. As you'll know, he directed several episodes of The Next Generation, beginning with In Theory, including A Fistful of Datas, and going right up to the penultimate episode, Preemptive Strike. He doesn't go into detail on those, nor too does he go into detail about his time as a producer on Star Trek Insurrection, for example, though he does express disappointment with how that film turned out, as well as its follow-up, Star Trek Nemesis. We must confess that this is a little disappointing that he didn't go into detail on these points of his career, because if nothing else, it would be lovely to see a sort of retrospective and deep dive on the understanding that he gained from and with his fellow castmates, particularly ones like Jonathan Frakes, who would go on to become such a prolific director as well. Number 10. The early days were challenging to revisit. The early stories of Star Trek The Next Generation have reached near mythological status, so not all of them make it into the book, but some of the stories, such as Patrick Stewart trading up to a Honda Prelude while some of the other cast members were getting their BMWs and Mercedes, is actually pretty funny. He does recount that he stayed away from conventions for the first couple of years of The Next Generation because he felt it was so important to concentrate on just building up the role with his own performance. In preparation for writing the memoir, he says that he did rewatch the entirety of The Next Generation, and perhaps a little unsurprisingly, found such early episodes as The Naked Now and The One We've Promised to Stop Discussing as pretty difficult to sit through. He cites the show's 5th and 6th years as something of a highlight, both, well, I suppose just in terms of directing, writing, acting, that everything was firing on all cylinders. He does also say that going into the 7th year, he felt that the quality of episodes were not up to what he was used to, and he was therefore satisfied that The Next Generation came to an end after the 7th year. Number 9. Not a pop music maestro. Before his time in Star Trek, he had appeared in David Lynch's version of the movie Dune. Obviously, today we're all thinking of the amazing Denis Villeneuve versions, both the one that's released and the one that's coming, but this was a vision. While on set, he had been cast, of course, as Gurney Halleck, and he got talking to another young Englishman who he found out played bass, and Patrick Stewart thought, wow, double bass, that's really cool. He was technically correct, because this young Englishman would play the double bass in the music video for a fairly popular song that was released in the 80s. I think it goes, Every Breath You Take. Because once Stewart asked this young musician, who then informed him, well, actually, I was talking about the bass guitar. He said, oh, do you play in a group? He said, yes, I play with the Police. And he says, you play in the Police band? Basically, Patrick Stewart hadn't a clue who Sting was. And this became a riot on set. Sting apparently was very gregarious about it and said, this is perhaps, maybe you just hadn't heard of me, that's absolutely fine. The Police were pretty popular at the time. Now, while Sting may not have passed much comment on it, a lot of the rest of the cast and crew thought it was absolutely bloody hilarious. Years later, Patrick Stewart would make his own album of music, although this one was more of a parody of country and western songs. And if you haven't seen the trailer, I beg you right now, go and watch it. Number 8, Gettinglynched. Sticking with David Lynch's Dune for a moment, there was a bit of a miscommunication, if you like, when Patrick Stewart was cast in the role of Gurney Halleck. He was quite a late addition to the cast, and it was a performance, Trevor Nunn's 1982 Royal Shakespeare Company performance or production of Henry IV, in which Patrick Stewart played the king, that brought him to the Twin Peaks director's eye. When Patrick Stewart then appeared on set and was getting into makeup, he found the director to be very quiet and standoffish. It actually developed to the point where the director didn't interact with him directly, and anytime he would need to communicate something to Stewart, he would do so in a way where he addressed the entire cast. This frankly unpleasant situation would only really be understood when Stewart would later be having dinner with Raffaella De Laurentiis, who explained that David Lynch cast him effectively thinking that he wasn't acting that much in Henry IV. So when a bald Yorkshireman walked in to play the role of Gurney Halleck, he got a bit of a shock. Number 7, cue Diana and David. The revelation that Patrick Stewart stood there with some of Diana Muldaur's lines taped to his forehead during filming is one of the biggest takeaways of the book from Trekkies. I had never heard this story before. It's not so much a revelation as a sort of a sadly understood fact that Diana Muldaur did not have a good time while playing Pulaski in the 2nd season of The Next Generation. Another thing that I wasn't entirely aware of was that if we skip forward to the 6th season episode's Chain of Command, and Patrick Stewart's compatriot David Warner was cast incredibly last minute in the part of Gul Madred, or Gul Madrid, if we are to believe the audio version. The fact that this had happened so last minute meant effectively Warner didn't have time to learn his lines, and so what we don't see as an audience is all the cue cards that were on the other side of the camera as he was delivering his lines as the terrifying Gul Madred. Now, the deliverance that he gives is perhaps a bit unsurprising when you think of both Warner and Stewart coming up together in the theatres. Warner's star took off, while Stewart's was a little bit slower. He recounts a time when, you know, David Warner is being recognised for movies like The Omen, and of course, Star Trek 5 and 6, and Stewart would often be asked by people at the end of a performance going, "Are you somebody?" That's sure to sting a little bit. Number 6, Captain by a hairpiece's breadth. So this is one of the stories that it's at this stage, this is fairly well known. The whole Gene Roddenberry didn't want a bald person playing his captain, and, you know, people had to fight for him. So, when Patrick Stewart was brought forward for the role, Gene Roddenberry initially vetoed it. He just wasn't happy, wasn't interested, but perhaps what has become a little bit blown out of proportion is how vehemently he didn't want Patrick Stewart for the role. He just didn't really fancy him for it. Despite all the additions and despite negativity, it came down to Patrick Stewart and one other actor, and both producers Robert Justman and Rick Berman were really lobbying hard for Patrick Stewart to get the role. Patrick Stewart, hearing the feedback about the hair, sent off for his custom-made wig from the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he had it flown out to LA, and he went in and he read the part, and I'm slightly paraphrasing here, but everyone broke their shit laughing because he looked ridiculous. He was told to take it off, the rest is history. What is a nice coda to that story is, again, this is fairly well known, but as time went on, Gene not only warmed to Patrick Stewart, but when faced with the question, wouldn't we have cured baldness in the future, he would said, we wouldn't care. Number 5, magnetic personality. If one has been paying attention to the internet over the last few years, one will have loved the friendship that has been on show between Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. Although Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen were aware of each other as their careers were kind of coming up together, it wasn't until the first X-Men movie that the pair of them actually worked together and their friendship developed. Stewart recounts that they have a conversation that's been going for 23 years unbroken, as in the kind of thing where we'll pause it, we'll come back to it then in a moment. Like, that's just the sign of friendship, you know? It's so strong, in fact, that McKellen went and got himself ordained so that he could perform the ceremony between Patrick Stewart and his wife, Sonny Ozell. This was done during McKellen and Stewart's effectively Beckett tour, where they were doing a double performance of Waiting for Godot and No Man's Land. There are so many pictures as part of a social media blitz for this that was part of a campaign that they called Gogo and Dido Do NYC, that shows the pair of them in their characters' bowler hats, and yeah, honestly, it's like the cutest thing you could ever see. Fun fact, one of those photos sees them meeting one Leonard Nimoy hopping out of a car. Number 4, Eye of the Steiger. Back in his Yorkshire Murfield days, Patrick Stewart would make money each week doing delivery runs for local fish and chip shops, where he would add just a modest delivery fee on top of it. He would save this money and put it toward going to the cinema, where sometimes, you know, he would get a little bit of help, as being underage, other moviegoers would pick up a ticket for him. One of the films that he returned to again and again was On the Waterfront, starring Marlon Brando and Rod Steiger. He found a lot of things to identify with these characters. While they were in Brooklyn and he was in Yorkshire, it was their impoverished backgrounds that he really was able to see himself in. Now, in the 1970s, in Patrick Stewart's debut movie role, Hennessy, he would actually work with veteran actor Rod Steiger, and he would celebrate this by putting a gun in Steiger's face. It was part of the script, I promise. Steiger left a huge impression on Stewart during this, because not only was he excellent at his own craft, but he insisted on remaining on set to read his lines off camera so that Patrick Stewart could get his close-ups with a real performance beside him. Something Stewart was amazed that someone as, well, frankly, important as Steiger would insist on taking place. The two of them would then go and eat together, and Stewart was just bowled over by the kindness of the man taking the time to sit down and have dinner together. Number 3, jobbing actor. Nowadays, Patrick Stewart is a household name. You know him from his performances, you know him from pictures of him sitting in the bath dressed as a lobster, and you know him from that quadruple take where he was a little bit high. It wasn't always this way. Growing up, the actor was working in theatre, but he was getting side jobs like assistant stage manager, he was working as understudy, he was working in various backstage roles as well, and he was then moving on to both main and minor roles. All of this, as much as possible, was within the Royal Shakespeare Company, although of course there were side jobs as well. But according to Stewart in the book, it really was the Royal Shakespeare Company that gave him the stability that allowed him to begin his family and to provide for them as the years would go by. It would also give him enough stability that as the decades like the 70s and the 80s would done, he was able to seek film work as well. A good deal of the memoir is devoted to these years, and you can understand why. They were incredibly formative. One of the funny quirks actually to come out of all of the theatre work is that his voice, whenever he delivered anything, it was already attuned to projecting to fill a theatre, so you had to learn how to speak quietly. Number 2, more than a captain's holiday. The third season of Star Trek The Next Generation is mostly remembered for episodes like Yesterday's Enterprise, the first part of The Best of Both Worlds, and things like The Offspring and Sins of the Father, which is a shame because Captain's Holiday is a really fun episode. It's an episode that gives Picard the opportunity to have a little bit of fun and romance, but not in the similar ways that We'll Always Have Paris or The Measure of a Man had done so with revisiting old flings. There was, unfortunately, a little bit of drama as well. You see, the episode was being filmed as Patrick Stewart's first marriage to his then wife Sheila was beginning to wind down. With that strain came the introduction to, certainly Patrick Stewart's personal life, of Jennifer Hetrick, who we would know better as the archaeologist Vash. The on-screen chemistry between the two, turns out it wasn't an act because they became a couple for a short period of time, and while that frankly helped to improve the performances, it did absolutely nothing to help the rocky marriage, and once his then wife Sheila discovered that there was a third person in the marriage, this led to divorce proceedings. It was also not to last with Hetrick because the pressure of the intense media attention around them led to that relationship ending, so that by the time that Hetrick would return as Vash for the episode Cupid, They were just back to being amicable friends at this point. Number 1, Grampy Rabbit and Professor X. Not necessarily a combination you might think of, but Patrick Stewart, according to Making It So, is incredibly well acquainted with Brian Blessed. Years before Blessed would rain down hell with the rest of the winged people in Flash Gordon, Blessed would meet Patrick Stewart in the 8-day residential drama course in the spring holidays of 1953. Blessed is 4 years older than Patrick Stewart, and he made a tremendous impression on the younger actor immediately, although the pair of them would only actually work together once. They would both perform in the BBC's acclaimed I, Claudius, with Blessed playing the Emperor. Stewart would play the conniving Praetorian Guard commander Sejanus, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is killed after 4 episodes. Still, all these years later, Stewart says he's still spotted in the role, and it always makes him smile. Folks, thanks so much for following along. This has been a bit of a special one, because this is the first, I think, autobiography has come out since I've been working here. Thanks so much again, Clive, to going through and getting those fun bits. But again, I do implore you, pick up a copy of this. It is worth it. It is a lot of fun, and it's quite bittersweet as well. I think you'll really enjoy it. Folks, thank you so much. You're all awesome. You're all wonderful. I will see you again soon. Remember, you can follow us over on Twitter at TrekCulture. We're on Instagram at TrekCultureYT. We're on both Blue Sky and TikTok at TrekCulture as well. You can follow myself at Sean Ferrick on the various socials. You can follow Clive, who wrote the original article, at SKOST, some kind of Star Trek, so SKOST. That's on Twitter as well. You are all awesome. You are wonderful. Make sure that you live long and prosper. Make it so.